Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the IC 109 podcast.
You're at 109 right now.
Tonight I'm talking with Joe. And Joe and I are going to be talking about the black man in Ethiopia. So sit back, buckle up, and enjoy the ride. Joe, you there?
Yes, sir.
Right on. So this is a continuation from our conversation earlier. We were both talking about Ethiopia, and, well, we're both black men. And so from the perspective of black men, I think the topic of Ethiopia is very special, very near and dear to the black man's heart. Would you agree?
To those who know about it. In my opinion, I would say, for those who've been around the culture, who've had experiences with them or spoken to them, and once they've gotten a taste of it, I think it is a very special spot to someone who's had the opportunity to speak to someone from there. I do feel like a majority of uneducated or unaware of African Americans think of Africa as just one giant place as a continent, but don't think about the individualization of each and every individual country. So I think once they are aware of that area in Africa and they realize what comes from it and what's experience they can gain from them, I do believe they would, put that in themselves to realize that this is a special place to them. And not only that, but to Ethiopians who come here because of the fact that that's their motherland. And the closest thing they have to would be, speaking to African Americans out here who aren't aware of it and they're here to educate. So to me and my ideas, I do think it's a very important place to the black man.
And that's an excellent point that you mentioned, the contact, and there's a point at which a black man or black people have to come into contact with, Ethiopia to gain an appreciation for the country, the culture, and the history. I have my story about, how I learned about Ethiopia, but why don't you tell me about your experience? How did you come into know and love and appreciate Ethiopia?
So I'm going to speak from someone who has not had the opportunity to go to Africa, let alone Ethiopia. But my experience with the culture and all started when I want to say maybe about 5 years ago when I went to an Ethiopian hookah lounge. And the first thing I noticed was it wasn't a stigma of, there's a stigma of when you deal with Africans and Black Americans that we don't like each other. And I think the miscommunication comes from understanding. But when I went to the Ethiopian hookah lounge, it wasn't a situation of, an American. It was more of, hey, where are you from? Tell me a little about yourself. Oh, we're Ethiopian. Are you familiar with it? And it started with a conversation, honestly. And that conversation alone brought intrigue to myself. And after going there several times, inviting friends, it came to a situation and understanding of, this is our culture, this is our heritage. And, from the dancing they do for any type of cultural event to, just speaking to them and, having conversations, you realize that the ideas they have are family oriented, which is lost not only in America, but, African American culture in general. The idea of family is not what it should be. As for there, I experienced something that was just, a culture shock of a female feeding me who had no relationship to me, who didn't know me from a can of paint. It was a conversation of, have you tried this? And then she fed me. And it was the weirdest thing because it was that idea of family, understanding, and togetherness. Now, again, I'm an American, born in Los Angeles, raised in Los Angeles my whole life. So for me being an outsider to be treated that way was eye-opening. And it wasn't a one-time ordeal. It was every time I went there and spoke to the owner of the shop, the family that ran that business, every single person knew each other. And, it wasn't just them in this one area. They would go on trips from, California to Las Vegas together to see, Ethiopian artists and things of that nature. And just seeing them together, to closing the event down, to inviting me and my friends there, to serving us cake, to teaching us the dances, to treating outsiders like them, it was, a very eye-opening experience. And what I learned from that situation is if you want to have the best experience close to Ethiopia without going there, the biggest connect would be DC. So ideally for me, it was an idea that not only are they very family oriented, not only to their own Ethiopians, but also to the African Americans themselves in America. And that one, if you ever want to get a taste for it before you go to Ethiopia, you can always go to DC and get the closest thing to Ethiopian food, and just showing me pictures of, the household they live in, to down the street to, how you can walk to a grocery store and everyone knows each other, and the idea of family. It was really eye-opening. So from someone who's never been there, that's where it got my intrigue.
Wow. Okay. So you had this. Well, okay. You mentioned she was serving you food and putting a mouthful of food in your mouth. That's the gursha. That's Ethiopian. That's their custom, gursha, and it's a friendly, warm gesture, a gesture of affection to hand feed, someone. It can be between friends. It could be between, new acquaintances and whatnot. That's called gursha. And yeah, it can be surprising when when an Ethiopian offers to feed you. But I'm surprised that you said DC. I'm surprised that that the largest population of Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia is located in our nation's capital.
So I just want to put this out there. I'm not someone who is going to have small talk if it goes nowhere. I'm someone who I think a conversation is only as meaningful as the intention behind it. And when I was there, I'm very inquisitive for things that are intriguing to me. So, after getting fed, from Gersha, I said, hey, is this a normal thing? And they said, yeah, it's a normal for us. And, after me asking questions and, asking, well, where would be because the first thing I'm always for me to identify with a culture, I look at the food they eat and how they eat it, because, when you look at other countries, they eat whatever's around them. That's what they make do out of. So when I asked, for example, if I want to get the closest thing to, Ethiopia here, where would it be? And they didn't, shoot around, give me any type of BS. They went straight to the point. DC is where you will see the majority of Ethiopians, because that is the biggest area. When they come here from Ethiopia, that is the landing spot where they come from, and they divide from there. And when she said DC, I was, shocked as well, because I was thinking DC, I would have never thought that would have been the biggest Ethiopian population. But after having all these conversations and realizing, that's, where the connecting flight goes from, it made sense. And, ideally, it was crazy for them to give me the rundown of, ideally where to go to, what to ask for, how to reach out to people, how to, approach them. And it was just a very, meaningful conversation to figure out where to go if you want the closest thing without leaving America. A lot of people are terrified of flying, or a lot of people are terrified of going to another country, especially African Americans who don't know their roots. So to know that if I wanted to get the closest thing to it without, leaving my comfort zone, I can always go to DC and experience the culture secondhand. It's not the best, but it's the closest thing we have here. And I really thought that meant something.
All right. Well, we are in Los Angeles, but there's also Little Ethiopia.
That is true. And I do want to be honest, I have not been to Little Ethiopia. The closest I've been to Ethiopians in Los Angeles is Fairfax. There's a lot of them that have a lot of shops and everything of that nature that I've experienced. As far as Little Ethiopia, I haven't been to Los Angeles' version of Little Ethiopia, but I have been to Vegas. There's a huge population of Ethiopians on Palm Street. It's not probably about 5 miles away from the Strip. And I went to an Ethiopian restaurant, and, just the portions alone are family style. The equivalent of going to, for example, if you went to Atlanta and got Southern cuisine and a family portion, it's a similar type of, amount of food you get for the food you get in Vegas in Little Ethiopia. But at the same time, it wasn't overly priced. It was relatively priced, compared to going to any other restaurant. But the food had flavor, and it had, spices I've never had before, ideally. And another thing that I've had out there, again, in Vegas, unfortunately not in Los Angeles, is Ethiopian coffee, which I genuinely think is a very unique blend of coffee beans, in my opinion, honestly.
All right. Well, are you familiar with this idea or the history of coffee and its origination and its discovery taking place in Ethiopia?
I am not familiar with that story or that rundown of how it happened.
You're not familiar with it? You've never heard this?
I've heard bits and pieces of it, but to recite any part of it, I would literally be making it up. I have heard essentially how it got cultivated and how it got, how they had, how they had their own coffee and basically, ideally got taken over and put into a trade and they got taken out of their hands and things of that nature. And I'm probably butchering the story, but that's the best of my rundown of it, if it's even close enough to that.
Okay. So there's this legend about a goat herder in Ethiopia. I forgot his name, forgot which region this took place. Well, the goat herder, I guess he decided to take a rest near a coffee bean tree. And the goats began eating the coffee beans. And sooner or later, the goats began hopping around. They showed that there was a reaction. They were having a reaction to what they had eaten. And so this goat herder was, surprised. I hope that's the correct term. A goat herder. I mean, he's a shepherd, but these weren't lamb, or these are goats. I think that's how the story goes. So forgive me for butchering the story and whatnot. But anyhow, the animals had a reaction, and he put two and two together and said, "There's something interesting, something special about these beans." And so, I guess, after taking the beans or just taking note of those beans and that particular tree, later, maybe generations, maybe whatever, they slowly developed the coffee drink by, roasting the beans, or rather deshelling, taking off the husk of the bean, and then roasting and going through the entire process. But the discovery of the beans, and yes, history or legend, that all took place in Ethiopia. Of course, when cultures traveled and intermixed, then there is another legend in India about an Indian who, I guess, traveled to Ethiopia and stole the beans and took them to India. But the first legend, the first story about the discovery of coffee takes place in Ethiopia. So that's pretty widely known, or rather widely shared, this history of coffee. And even today, every coffee bean that has ever been produced around the globe has its origin with the particular Arabica bean, which comes from Ethiopia. So even though the beans today, the trees can be found, or the coffee beans are cultivated or grown in Brazil, in Colombia, and Peru, and all of these places around the globe, the particular bean that is being grown and regrown, centuries later, all came from Ethiopia. And that just lends itself to, that's just one aspect of Ethiopia's, legendary status. It's like, oh, this is Ethiopia, right?
One, I want to apologize to any Ethiopians who heard me definitely get the story wrong, because I did not know the legend or the story of how that happened. So that is, I want to make sure no one feels offended when they hear this. But I think that's a great story, because nowadays with technology and things of that nature, the fact that you can trace whether it's the smallest amount of DNA or any type of anything as far as significance in any type of or anything in someone's DNA or biology, or body, sorry, for plants. It's interesting to know that they would all ideally come from one area where they primarily would have grown from. And I think that's pretty intriguing. I think another thing that's intriguing, bringing up this whole idea of, essentially a goat herder essentially accidentally found that, because it lends to the fact that, and I'm just going to go off as far as, when it comes to the human body, I think it's intriguing that something as simple as a reaction to coffee, which plants automatically use as a defense mechanism, turned into a cultivation of something that is an icon in every country. You know, there's not one country I can think of that doesn't run on coffee. You know, it's the only drug that everyone, you know, primarily, especially adults in a 9 to 5 or a typical work schedule, take. And 9 times out of 10, it's even a luxury now. You know, you have people who are not only having espresso machines and making TikToks, YouTube videos about it, but there's a whole culture of tasting beans, whether it's Arabica beans or whether it's Colombian beans, and the fact that they all ideally would have came from one area shows the fact that there's an idea that was had, and now that idea is worldwide. I think that's a really great, you know, story that it started in one place and look where it is now. It's everywhere. You know, I can't think of any place, you know, even third world countries that don't have coffee, because you know, it's one of those things that it may be hard to grow, but once they grow it, you have essentially a plant version of gold, because there's never going to be, that I can think of, a world where we don't have coffee, because of the fact that it's one of the most heavily produced and marketed and sold drugs out there. And I hate to use the word drugs, ideally that's what it is. The caffeine is a drug. There's people who have caffeine fits when they don't have enough. And you know, it's a great idea that they were able to cultivate that. It just sucks that they weren't the ones to market it the way it is, in my opinion.
The thing, though, is yes, as a drug, as a stimulant, it hasn't always had such a positive, you know, reception across cultures as it was expanding. For instance, the legend, the story, the history goes that the Muslims, when they found coffee, they discovered, for one, you know what? I'm not the scholar here. Let's just make that clear. So I could be wrong about the Muslims. It might have been the Turks, the Sultan. I don't know who it was, but there was one group. I think they were the Muslims, and first, initially they didn't want to have anything to do with it because they believed it was a drug. However, they later changed their minds about it because they discovered that a stimulant like coffee, the coffee bean, and the drink, coffee, would allow them to stay up longer so that they could pray and worship longer. And so they reversed their opinion of coffee when they discovered the beneficial aspects of it.
It's funny that you bring that up, because to me it's very intriguing that, you know, ideally it's only a bad thing until you, like, for example, the fact that, you know, it's looked down upon until it serves a purpose, whether religiously or financially, and that's usually what it seems like it comes down to, in my opinion. You know, who is in charge and what do they want to gain from it? If they see it as it brings the population down because it's the drug or whatever this is, there's a lot of misconceptions until it's beneficial to the person on top. And that seems, you know, not seems, but it's extremely likely that happened because of the fact that, you know, coffee, I would love to be a fly on the wall the day that conversation happened to see what made them change, because to me it would be a great, you know, way to see that there's a culture shift there. That's a huge culture shift. The people who were looked down upon now are looked at as the, you know, people to go to, because not only are they cultivating something that was looked down upon, now it's something they can use for praying. So, you know, that definitely seems extremely likely, because it's always bad until you can find something to do with it financially or until it benefits someone on top, in my opinion at least.
Right on. And so I guess through this part of the conversation, the podcast, we've already established that the black man's relationship to coffee, all right, and the black man's relationship to Ethiopia through coffee, all right, is, I guess, beneficial, because I like coffee, and Joe, you like coffee, right?
I love it. I used to work at Starbucks. Trust me, I love coffee.
Right. Cool. So, all right. So we've already discussed one aspect of Ethiopian, you know, culture, history, through coffee, and of course through, you know, food with the culture of Gersha and all. Let's see.
Well, I have a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Ideally, because you've traveled, you've seen the country, you've seen essentially what it's like, you've lived there, you've been there, you know, several times. What do you think would be the best way to not only inform but intrigue African Americans who are scared or unaware or ignorant to not only the motherland, but certain aspects of Ethiopia, what would you say to them, or what would you, do to lean or guide them in the direction of understanding and things of that nature?
Well, I have to say that my travels to Ethiopia, the things that I've learned about, well, not only Ethiopia, but Africa, I guess two things. A healthy curiosity, I guess, was developed, within me. And but I think that curiosity started when I was in about sixth grade in elementary school, and my teacher told us to one day go to Africa. And my teacher was, I guess, pro-black, and she had traveled herself, and she told us about different parts, different regions of Africa, and how the people are different. And I specifically recall her talking about the blue black people of Sudan, and that was intriguing. But it was just her. The fact that she encouraged all of her students, not only me, but she encouraged us to travel to Africa, that really, impressed me and stuck with me. Um, so I just carried that into the future. And when I finally got into the position whereby I could afford to fly to Africa, then I remembered, I guess I remember making a promise either to myself or to my teacher, Mrs. Clisby, Mrs. Shirley Clisby, um, to go to Africa. And so I did. I finally did, and yeah, it was a very important decision, and a very it was well worth it, well worth the price of admission, so to speak. So I think in that sense, teachers play a very, important, pivotal role in our lives, and I just have to give praise and thanks to that teacher.
Okay, so I'm glad you touched upon that, because not only is a teacher telling you to get out of your comfort zone, but to experience new things, she's speaking from experience, and the fact that that really meant something to you is a lot. Because I feel like, especially right now, we all know public schooling is not the ideal thing if you want to get the best education. Not saying people don't thrive or succeed, but the fact that a teacher could, one, say travel, because I think the biggest thing right now in this world, especially in America, we're so in our own bubble that we just cannot fathom, another country's experience. I had an eye-opening experience when I worked with someone, this is after, after going to the Ethiopian lounge I used to go to. I had a coworker named Bio, Biyo, and that was short for his full name. And what I learned was, a lot of people think, especially Africa in general, it is a crap hole. They don't have their stuff together. And there's certain aspects of that are true, but that's not the whole continent. Africa is a huge continent. They have Egypt, you have South Africa, you have Nigeria, you have all these places. And the person I worked with, he was from Cameroon. And one of the things I learned was, a lot of people want to crap on, their education system. But what this man relayed to me was, not only did he speak English, he also spoke French, and he also spoke his native language. So, I feel like people, in order to understand a lot of places, curiosity is one aspect of it. But I feel like, in my opinion, if you can give them positive reinforcements of, they're going to gain something from it, I think that would be a better idea, or, I think that'd be a great idea for him. Because when he explained that to me, it blew my mind. Because, out here, the average person, if they go to school, they may learn Spanish, they may learn French, but it doesn't mean they're going to, live with it. And to live and go in that area and deal with the day to day, it's a different thing. You were there, you experienced it firsthand. You may not be 10 out of 10 with it as far as education, understanding of it, but I'd say you're a good at least 7 to 8, because you've been there enough to have a conversation and be in the culture. And I feel like you would be a good representation of that teacher that related to you. You can do that same thing to them, because you lived it, you've been through it, you've had the conversations, you've had the eye-opening experiences, you've had the spirituality from it. And I feel like you could be the, perfect conduit to relay that to other students because of your experiences.
Right on. Well said. Well said. we're going to take a short break and get back into the conversation. So I'll stop the recording.
You're at 109 right now.
Joe, you still there?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's see. Traveling to Africa, you know, it can be intimidating. It can certainly be intimidating if you haven't. I don't know if you haven't been prepped for the experience. Africa can certainly be intimidating, and in my case, I did a lot of research before my trip. Um, Again, a lot of the research was just pure curiosity, and so I watched a lot of YouTube videos. And one YouTube video that comes to mind, it was actually recorded more than 20 years ago, maybe 25 years or so ago. It's called Wonders of the African World, Slave Kingdoms, and Ethiopia. And it is narrated. It's hosted by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. Are you familiar with Dr. Gates, Skip Gates?
I am not. I'm gonna be honest, I am not familiar with him.
All right. So it's either he's Harvard or Yale. He's either a Harvard or Yale professor, or Yale graduate. Do you remember when President Obama met with a professor after he had been arrested for trying to?
Okay, let me. I think I understand the story. So apparently, it was a professor who was trying to get in his house.
Yes.
Called 911. When he called 911, he said he can't get in his house. And what happened was the police had showed up, and they said they thought he was breaking into his house.
Right.
And they said, we got a call that you're breaking your house, and it was African American. The problem was, not only did the dispatcher never say what the race was, they assumed. So President Obama came there, had a beer with both the officer and professor as well for the misunderstanding, which was a very tense situation, but I can understand the frustration. You're going into your own house. Race was never talked about in the conversation, and the fact that you automatically assumed he was in the wrong was a very frustrating thing. So I believe they all had a beer and, took a picture for a photo op, and I believe that is the story from my understanding, if I'm telling it correctly.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And this professor, this gentleman, who was trying to get into his own home, well, he's the host of this documentary.
Okay.
He's the host of actually many documentaries that focus on Africa, on African Americans, I guess on the diaspora of blacks around the globe, because he even has he's even produced documentaries about being black in Latin America. Very fascinating stuff. I highly recommend it. Well, I watched his documentary, and then I got a really good sense about Ethiopia from that documentary. Even though it's really old, the picture quality is pretty low, and I still was able to learn a great deal. And from that information, well, I guess there were many documentaries that I actually watched. I was able to put things together, piece things together before going. And the last thing that really got me is I was sick and tired of personally having a white person, or basically I didn't want a white person to tell me about my life, or I didn't want a white person to lead me through the process. I wanted to live life on my own terms. I wanted to see things for myself, because there's far too many, because I didn't want National Geographic to tell me about the world. I wanted to see it. I wanted to experience it for myself. And even when I saw Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., I thought that's fine and dandy, but he's a Harvard or a Yale professor, and I should have this experience. I should be able to go where he has gone and see and learn from myself. So I really wanted to be in his position. And so when I finally got the chance to go to Africa, I booked a tour that pretty much followed every location that he traveled to in that documentary on YouTube that I watched. So that was a huge, was it a cathartic moment, or because I was, I was no longer watching history or watching these things and saying, wow, that's pretty cool. I could touch the ground. I could eat the food. I could smell the smells. I was there on the land where historic events took place, and that for me was it was absolutely rewarding, gratifying, and better than sitting at home watching it.
Let me ask this question, because one, obviously, you did something that a lot of people never do. You said, I'm going to experience this firsthand. And we live in a world where people think looking at it through, a phone screen or TV screen or, computer screen, whatnot, is living it, when in reality of it is they're showing you everything in rose-tinted glasses. So when you went there, what was the first thing that you'll never forget was just, wow, this is what I'm experiencing. This is Ethiopia. What was that aha moment, if you don't mind me asking?
The first thing that comes to mind is I don't think anyone talks about the altitude.
Never heard that one.
Yeah. Ethiopia's the altitude is quite high. I don't know the exact figures and whatnot, but it's so high when you exit the airplane. When you're just briskly walking around the city, you're going to lose your breath. You're going to find that you're going to have to, stop and rest. And I remember I was at the hotel, and there were some athletics, fit fellas, and they were walking up the stairs, and they got winded. And I saw them. Now, I had been in Ethiopia. It may have been my second or third time there, and I saw them, and it was their first time. And when I saw them get winded, I was like, oh, they're rookies, But that has to be the first thing, because I wasn't expecting it. It really shocked. Yeah, it basically, it literally takes your breath away.
Literally, in the aspect, in every facet of the way. So that's, I'm glad you said that, because I've never heard that. So out of all the stories I've heard, altitude has never been one of them. So, the fact that you have athletes, and again, we're talking athletes who are probably playing basketball, 6 foot, who are used to running miles, things of that nature. When they get hit with it, that's a big eye-opening experience, because I've never heard about the altitude situation. So I'm glad you're touching upon that. What would you say would be a second thing you noticed, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I think that, let's see, on the tour they mentioned Lucy, the 3.5 million year old fossils that were found in Ethiopia. So that's something, and Ethiopia being the cradle of civilization, or the home of humanity. That's something. There's so many things about Ethiopia, from Lucy to coffee, but then with regard to Black people, the history that I learned about Ethiopia, and the Battle of Adwa, that had to be a moment, like a sort of a watershed moment for me. The Battle of Adwa. You ready for this?
Yes, I'd never heard of it, so I'm ready to listen.
So essentially, around the time of the scramble for Africa, 17, 1800s, where all of the European nations were scrambling to colonize Africa, you know, Portugal, Germany, and France, Spain, you name it. Italy wanted to colonize Ethiopia, and they had to fight for Ethiopia. Well, Italy lost against Ethiopia. Italy lost its bid to colonize Ethiopia, and the fact that Ethiopia defeated, this was a decisive battle, the Battle of Adwa. It was a decisive battle where Ethiopia defeated a colonizer, a European colonizer. You see, this was the only victory by an African nation over a European nation. And the ideal of Africa defeating a colonizer, it basically sent shockwaves, around the world, around the globe, for all African nations, because today there are about 54 African nations, and Ethiopia is the only one that did not fall to an European colonizer. And Ethiopia to this day has never been colonized. Now, what that means specifically is that Ethiopia was ruled by a monarchy or a king, and there have never been any outside influences, such that the official language in Ethiopia has pretty much remained, the Ethiopian language, Amharic. You see, when a colonizer comes in, then language goes by the wayside, and then English becomes the language that the official language is either English or French or Portuguese. These things change, but in Ethiopia's history, they were unaffected by a European colonizer. And so that ideal within itself it lends itself to a sense of pride in one's history, but also a sense of hope for other African nations who fail to colonizers. They look to Ethiopia and say, hey, if you can do it, then we can too. So, and it's that particular battle that when I discovered it, when I learned about it, it was like, oh, no wonder they have pictures of Black Jesus in their churches. No wonder I see angels with afros on the ceilings of their, what would be considered their cathedrals.
I'm glad you brought up.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
So I'm glad you brought up the whole idea as far as angels, right? I'll never forget when I was speaking to, one of the patrons at the Ethiopian Lounge, because again, like you said, right, when people get colonized and things of that nature, whether it be Portuguese, whether it be the Dutch, whether it be the, German or whatever you have, whoever's colonizing, the first thing that comes is a culture change because they're implementing their culture on yours. And one thing that, as far as Ethiopians, they're Christian, I would say. They believe in Jesus Christ, Father, the Spirit, the Father, the Lord, Holy Spirit. They believe in all that. And one of the things that he told me, again, a majority of people, the idea of Jesus is a white, blonde-haired man. But what he said is, if you ever read your Bible, the reason why that doesn't make sense is it had hair of wool. Now, you don't have to be a scholar to know this, but what race has hair like wool? When he said that to me, I said, what? I looked it up myself. And the fact that it says hair like wool is one of the weirdest things to me, because a lot of people bring up, they saw that in the Malcolm X movie with Denzel Washington. I never seen that movie, but when he said it to me and, in person, and I looked at it and I said, wait, really? And I looked at myself. It was the most eye-opening thing, because not only do you have it in black and white, the Bible was obviously written in Latin, interpreted by King Henry, and made it so ideally it would be the way he wants people to listen to it, the way he wants it to be written. But they never wrote out hair like wool. And to me, that is the biggest oversight, because if you got rid of that alone, people wouldn't have this idea that Jesus was black. But the fact that it still says it in English as plain as day is one of the biggest things to me, because a lot of people have an argument. Now, whether Jesus was black, whether he's white, it means no difference to me. To me, it means that he was a man who died for his sins for all of us to live. But that very strong statement that his hair is like wool, it's right there. If you feel it wasn't, fine, feel it wasn't. But at the end of the day, this is in the Bible. It says that right there. Why would someone write this and then say it doesn't make sense? Because again, like I've known, like we've all known our whole lives, African Americans, and some people in South America, whether it was colonization or, whether it was migration when Pangea split apart, there's not many people who have hair like wool. And I feel like that's the funniest thing that you're saying, angels and things of that nature in Jesus, because it says it that, he had hair like us. I just think that's the funniest thing to me.
Yeah, the Jesus and Black Jesus, or the ideals that we have or that we've accepted about Jesus and the descriptions in the Bible. Yeah, that's it's interesting, because the topic, I guess I kind of feel comfortable talking about Black Jesus, and I have my 10-9 story about Jesus, but there have been a lot of people, a lot of famous people, in fact, a lot of famous Black actors who have, tried to bring this idea, into the mainstream. Sidney Poitier, who died about a year or so ago. Well, once he played Black Jesus. I believe the film was called Brother John, and this was released before, I think before I was born, in the 70s, before you were around too. But okay, so that's one example. Sidney Poitier. Have you heard of Blair Underwood?
Of course.
Oh, okay, great. So Blair Underwood, 20 some, more than 20 years ago, Blair Underwood released a movie in which, like, the premise of the movie was to present a Black Jesus, to the mainstream. And he produced this movie independently. And he even went on Phil Donahue's show. And the Phil Donahue show, you can find that on YouTube. The movie, I forgot the name of it, but under Blair Underwood, his movie is available on Amazon Prime if you ever want to watch that. But when such respected, celebrities try to present the idea of a Black Jesus and try to support it, I think it's a noble cause. It's like, wow, these folks are really trying to wake people up, because yes, it is pretty plainly written in the Bible, hair of wool, feet of burnt bronze, and fiery red eyes. And I'm going to tell you that the part about the fiery red eyes is one that I couldn't understand, and I just didn't understand how to accept that. But here's something from my travels I realized: the darker the being, the person, the darker that they are, the more likely that the whites of their eyes aren't actually white, but the melanin, I suppose, dims their eyes. And if Jesus were a Black man and Jesus were, very dark, I imagine that his eyes too would somehow. Okay, wait. have you ever there is this video on YouTube about Michael Jordan, and people have asked the question, why are Michael Jordan's eyes, why do they look that way? Why are they dark? Why are they, is he sick? Is something wrong with him? There's a video out there on YouTube about this topic. And essentially, I think it's the same thing with Jesus. Because Jesus was such a dark man, his eyes too were they reflected the deep melanin in his skin. That's what I'll say about that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, and I'm just gonna say this in my point of view from the whole situation is, and that's one thing about the Bible, which is funny because, I don't take a lot of things literal. Like, I did take that portion because it's a very specific description. But to me, my interpretation of that was it the fire in his heart to help mankind? Was it, to me, because the only way I would see that in my idea is if someone had a camera, they took a picture and flashed it, but then that wouldn't add up because they didn't have cameras back then. So, to me, it wouldn't make sense either way unless they meant, the passion and fire in his eyes. So, whether it was literal, to me, no. I mean, for God's sakes, the man, if he was, black, it's very rare for us to even have, pigment in our eyes or melanin in our eyes. But for that, I took it as, the ambition and fire in his eyes to help mankind. And that's what I took it as, for me at least,
Okay.
And with that being said, I do believe, a lot of things in the Bible, they have great morals. There's a lot of great morals. There's a lot of things that, aren't related to our days and what we live in now. But, with that being said, I do believe that it was more to interpret of having the passion and flame in his eyes to not only help mankind, but honestly help the betterment of his fellow man. And that's my interpretation of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I agree. Taking the Bible literally isn't really what we should be doing. As Dr. Henry Louis Gates, no, excuse me, I'm wrong doctor. Dr. John Henrik Clarke said that the Bible is full of allegory. All right. And so the stories that are told are not, to be believed or taken at face value, but they are to be interpreted, So that's where we'll leave it there. We're going to end this segment, and I'll stop the recording right here.
You're at 109 right now.
All right, guys, we're back with the third segment here of Ethiopia and the Black Man. I'm talking with Joe, and the one thing we haven't discussed is, around World War II, 1940s, I believe. In Ethiopia, I did mention the Battle of Adwa. Well, there were actually two battles of Adwa. There was the first Battle of Adwa and then the second. You see, what happened is Italy wanted to avenge their defeat. They wanted to come back and assert themselves because they thought that they should not have won. Or the Ethiopians should not have won. And so it was around the time of Benito Mussolini. Yeah, he was in power, and he said, no, we are Italians and we are superior, and so we must go back and defeat the Ethiopians. Now, the second war, the second Battle of Adwa, the Italians were successful in defeating the Ethiopians, but they were not able to colonize them. And I believe it was for 5 years that Ethiopia was occupied by the Italians. So even today, there are still buildings that are still standing that are, follow the Italian architectural style of the era. And yeah, so Italy certainly influenced Ethiopia, but they did not colonize. They did not stop Ethiopians from speaking their native language. Yeah, so it was a time of occupation. Now, at that time, African Americans wanted to join the war, wanted to fight against Italy. They wanted to fight on the side of Ethiopia, and our government, the U.S. government, would not allow Black American citizens to enlist in the fight against Italy, primarily because Italy is a European nation. So our government basically denied Black Americans the right to fight along the sides of Ethiopians based upon racism or racist policies. However, there were American soldiers, one in particular, John Charles Robinson. He was an aviator, Black American man. He had a very difficult time becoming an aviator, and he actually he posed as a janitor at an aviation school, and while he cleaned up the rooms, he listened to the lectures in order to learn how to fly airplanes. And he finally learned enough to fly airplanes, and I believe he had to travel to Europe, because there were so many. In France, there are at least 2 African American pilots who became pilots, Bessie Coleman and Eugene Bouillard, are famous African Americans who had to travel as far away as France to become pilots. I read the book about John C. Robinson, but I forgot how he did it. But these were immeasurable odds that he faced in America, because basically he was a Black man, and no school would educate a Black man. But because of his ingenuity and his cleverness, he was able to learn what he needed to learn in order to make it happen. John C. Robinson offered his services to the emperor in Ethiopia, and he said, "I will fly for you." And they said, "Well, come on." So John Charles Robinson was able to serve Emperor Haile Selassie, or Emperor Haile Selassie the First, in the second, in the Battle of Adwa, the second battle. And John Charles Robinson served the emperor and helped down many of the Italian fighter jets against the Ethiopians. So that was a victory for African Americans who wanted for Black men, for the Black man to have a desire to fight on the side of Ethiopia. John Charles Robinson's contribution to that war was very integral, because have you heard of Ethiopian Airlines?
Yes, I have.
Pretty much it was because of John Charles Robinson that Ethiopian Airlines exists today.
Isn't racism so funny how basically you could say one person is inferior to you, but ideally a man who literally got backhand knowledge, wasn't in the classroom, not only learned how to fly, but actually was able to give his services and empower a country that not only was he not, accustomed to, he was actually able to intrigue, impress, and have a whole airline from them. I just love the egg on people's face when they say people are inferior based on, predisposed traits. It's just one of the most intriguing things to me because, yes, not every race is the same, but that's what makes us that's what makes us unique at the end of the day. Like, the ideal that here too incompetent, from the race rhetoric that African Americans are, they're only built for muscle and athleticism. It's just the most ironic thing to listen because, I don't think one race is better than the other. I think every race has their own traits that they may perform better in, but again, it's also an environment of where they're raised, what they're taught, what they're learned. And something as ignorant as they're not mentally capable of flying a effing plane just on the color of their skin is the dumbest thing to me, because of the fact that not only did he prove them wrong, they had to fight to get their Purple Hearts. I mean, to be a black pilot was one of the hardest things to do, not only in World War II, but just generally trying to become a pilot because of the predisposition of thinking that these people are inferior to understand something without giving them a shot. It's one of the most eye-opening things. And I even think I forgot what the movie was, but I think it had Terrence Howard in it, where not only do you have these pilots flying, but you have them almost as suicide pilots because you don't think they're going to make it. And not only did they perform, they did enough to actually leave a dent into the other Air Force of Germans who are, in World War II, Germans are only going to be white because that's the only people who are going to be fighting for them are whites. They had a superiority complex of thinking not only were, Jews below them, but anything that wasn't white with blonde hair or white with black hair, it was just looked as inferior. And it's just to show that not only were they wrong, but it's just the dumbest thing to think of, because to judge someone from the color of their skin for something that they can't choose is stupid. To judge someone for what they do, okay, it's biased, but to judge them for something that they cannot control is not only ignorant, stupid, it just shows that whatever superiority you had went out the window when you made those statements. It's just baffling, in my opinion.
In 2012, the movie was released, Red Tails.
There we go, that one. That's what I was talking about.
Cuba Gooding Jr., Terrence Howard, Nate Parker, David Oyelowo, and some other folks here. Neo.
He is African. Not only is African, he's an African model who not only is an icon, but honestly, he has great stage presence. I mean, this man has been in freaking Marvel films, for God's sakes. He's been, high-class action films, and he's as dark as they come, as intelligent as they come. And, just to think about, if this man was maybe 50 years ago born, he wouldn't be anything. So I just love the idea of racism, because every idea that you have, you can prove with something else. I'm glad for it, because I love the fact that he doesn't have to change his accent. Who he is. No fret, no issues about it. And he even is a model, so a great actor. I have nothing but respect for that man.
Well, yes, he is. His parents are Nigerian, but he is British. He's from England.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wrong. I swear I thought he was African.
No, I mean, here's something that happened to me. In 2012, I was in Korea, and I was doing my research on, history and trying to figure out, where do we come from? How did we get here? And I had been listening to quite a few Black scholars. Specifically, I was listening to Ivan Van Sertima, and I loved listening to Ivan Van Sertima because, as a Black man, listening to him was very affirming, and I was proud. I felt good after listening to his lectures. However, I doubted a lot of what he said. And I figured, he's just saying that to make me feel good, to make me feel better about myself. And that has to do with some of the colonizing, the way that my mind has been colonized, because I've never heard the truth from Black people. I tend to, my education has always been, from white people. So I have a tendency to say, oh, the white people are right. And only when the white people say this will I ever believe it. And what happened to me is, after I listened to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima in 2012, about that time, I learned of Spencer Wells. Dr. Spencer Wells and he's a geneticist from Stanford University, which Stanford's right here in California. And Spencer Wells was basically saying everything that Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was saying, or rather, he was bringing forth evidence that supported everything that Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said, which, that only bolstered my confidence and my pride in what Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was saying. So I returned to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, sort of ashamed that I had doubted him initially, but I was ready to, learn even more. But can you imagine? It took me hearing from, Dr. Spencer Wells. Basically, Dr. Spencer Wells said that, all human beings, come from Africa. And for me, hearing it from a black man, it was like, well, I need more proof. But when Dr. Spencer Wells said it, then it was like, oh, well, and not only that, but the black professors and scholars, they hadn't used genetics. They weren't using, DNA to support what they were saying. They were using archaeology, sociology, and when Spencer Wells came along with the latest in technology to say, oh, the genes, the blood, it all traces back to Africa, then it was like, well, there's no way I'm going to argue with that, and I don't think anyone can argue with that. So I say all of that to say that David Oyelowo, you said he's African, but we're all African.
And I actually want to reiterate, sorry, I want to take that back. I do apologize. I got him confused with, and I'm going to butcher his name, Djimon Hounsou. I got him confused with that guy. So, again, I do apologize. I got him confused with that guy. But, when I think when it comes back to race, I think one of the funniest things when it comes to it is, when people say inferiority or we're, African Americans aren't on the same league or level as any other race, I think one of the funniest things people don't take into account is this, right? A human and another human based on race are going to have the same baby, and it's going to be, it's not going to be sterile. If you have a horse and a mule, if you have a horse and a donkey, you have a mule, which can be born sterile. If you have a tiger and a lion, it can be born sterile. You don't have that problem with humans. The only differentiation we've had besides apes would be, essentially Neanderthals. Those are not the same as human beings, but they're still able to procreate. And the only race that has had, any type of genetic fusion with them would be Caucasians. So when people say inferiority, I don't understand how people could say that without doing the math. Because like you said, you have genetics that prove a lot of things. Genetics prove that African Americans don't have any type of Neanderthal. And Neanderthal, which is looked at as they did have some type of language, they did have some type of social gathering, but it wasn't a part of humans. And the reason humans were able to get to where they were, or things that that nature, is because of the fact that they were able to not only have conversations, but actually have a language and dictate, and they bred that gene out to the point of where it no longer existed. And I really feel like, when that conversation is had about race and things of that nature, no one's taking account that there was an inferior other type of subspecies of human. It was Neanderthal, but that wasn't in African Americans, it was in Caucasians. And people never bring it up, which I think is intriguing.
Yeah. The Neanderthals, I don't know. I was in Switzerland when I was reading about the Neanderthal, and they actually, at their museum, they gave the Neanderthal the the credit for speech, and was it using the tool usage,
tool farming, hunter-gatherer type of thing, but not to the level that humans were. But sorry, go ahead. I didn't want to start. Apologies.
No. Yeah, it was borderline glowing. What they were saying about the Neanderthals, whereas there's so many. There were so many, forerunners, the Neanderthals, the Cro-Magnon, the well, I guess those are the only two outside of you know Homo sapiens sapiens that I can think of. Uh, yeah, they had about at least four different models of what early human-like or human beings, what they look like. But yeah, the description for the Neanderthal was, kind of glowing, saying that the Neanderthal was the dude, but he died out. So there aren't, you know, there are no longer Neanderthals, but there are traces of Neanderthals, in, modern Africans or I'm a modern human. So
Yeah, from my understanding, the Neanderthal was shorter but stockier, built for colder climate, and that's why they were saying it was, hard pressed to find them in Africa because the climate just wouldn't match their structure. They're meant to live in either harsher climates, hence why they're going to be hairier, why they're going to be, shorter, because the smaller you are, the less energy you have to exert to, live and survive. Hence why they were saying that, you're going to see these traces in, 99% Caucasian or, European or Anglo-Saxon, whatever you want to call it, in their trace DNA. As for African, you wouldn't see that.
right on. The what is it? Bill Nye. Bill Nye, the science guy, broke down, skin color and but the discussion that the explanation he provided could also be extended to, the traits, the physical traits that we have. So what he said is, for people who live closer to the equator, their skin will be darker because melanin is a natural
sun protection. It's a sun protection.
And as you go farther away from the sun or from the equator and farther north, then there's less sun exposure. Hence, there is no longer a need for that much sun protection, and so it is weaker. And
I think they
go ahead.
I think they said, and I could be wrong here, not a scholar, so I want to make this very clear and preface that. But I believe, they said obviously the African Americans, due to their exposure to sun, hence why they had darker colors, hence why, people in South America have darker pigment as well. I think they also touched upon the fact that the reason why, Asians have slanted eyes is due for the climate and snow they were in. Wide open eyes were not the ideal, asset to have in that climate because of the things and debris that might get in your eyes. So I it's one of the most intriguing things to talk about race because, to talk about race doesn't mean you have to be racist, but I do think that we need to just accept that there's certain traits people have, and it doesn't make you better, it doesn't make you worse, but there are things that one race has over the other. With African Americans, it may be the fact they have shorter hair because of the climate they're in. Long hair wouldn't be sustainable because of the fact that it might be getting caught. A lot of Africans or a lot of hunters and very tribe-based and things of that nature, so long hair just wouldn't sustain. But if it's kempt up to their hair, they have less to worry about when they're running, hunting, and things of that nature. Primarily Asians are, typically lactose intolerant, hence why there's not a lot of cheese in the cuisine and things of that nature. So, it's just one of those eye-opening experiences when he talked about it, because I can't remember what he went over as far as what Caucasians had, but it was just interesting to hear him break down every individual race, and not in a way as far as down talking, but just what each race has as something as a survival element.
Absolutely. The nostrils, wider nostrils on Africans are there to cool the brain, whereas more alkaline, I think the thinner noses of the Scandinavians, they're thinner. The nostrils are smaller so as not to allow cold air in to freeze the brain. It's so intriguing, and the thing about it is we need to know our bodies. We need to know individually our makeup and feed ourselves, what we can, process, what our bodies need, rather than just accept, everyone's drinking milk and eating cheese, fine, we'll do that as well. Because just like you said, for the Asians who are lactose intolerant, that can't possibly be right for them. So
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, getting back to it, I feel like with you in your, position, you should be that conduit to instill this in the people that you teach, because it's one thing to say, but it's nothing to teach. And the fact that you still, like you said, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that, you had a great teacher that, not only told it to, even though, they may have been pro-Black, but they told the whole class, get out and travel. If there's anything I could, say on this conversation, it'd be more of everyone needs to get out there, travel, get out your comfort zone, because that's how you learn. You don't learn doing the same thing. That's insanity. You learn from different experiences, different conversations. My next step is to go out of country. I just got my passport this year, so
hey,
I will
congratulations. Right on.
Hey, I know, right? It's about time. At this age, it's a shame, but to just go out and get out and do it, because after you get out of your comfort zone, how many times can you be uncomfortable doing the same thing? At one point, it just becomes second nature. If not second nature, it becomes a trend. So at this point, it's going to travel, honestly, and doing that within the next 2 years of going to Africa. It's just getting the idea of doing more research to figure it out. And that's why I'm glad I could talk to you about it, because someone who's been there, it's great to have someone who can speak from not only a Black perspective, but someone who can understand coming from that fear and overcoming it.
Well, how old are you?
30.
Oh man, I thought you were like 27.
Nah, 30. I'll be honest, 30, man.
So I left. I traveled for the first time internationally at 27. So yeah, don't feel bad. Yeah, if you're already thinking of traveling, then like you're and you have a passport, so you're farther along than many people will ever be. It's getting that passport and having that in hand. Oh man, yeah, the battle has half of the battle's already been won. So kudos, congratulations to you. Let's talk more to flesh out some more ideas about travel, and hopefully I can give you some more insight into where you want to go, and what how to get there, and where to stay, and how to be safe and stuff like that. So
well, look forward to it, man. Look forward to every one of these conversations, honestly, especially when you have someone who's familiar with your background and things of that nature.
Right on. So all right, we're going to end it right here. Joe, I want to thank you again for sharing your thoughts and ideas here at IC 10-9.
You're at 109 right now.
And thank you guys for listening. Peace and blessings.